Hey everyone, Cleo here, and welcome to another reading vlog. It is Thursday. I am getting worried about my TBR because I have just over a week left to finish final book on my TBR, to finish the longest book on my TBR. So, as you will have seen by the title, this is a dedicated reading vlog to The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, which is an over 800-page book. So if I read 100 pages every day in this book, I should be okay. But I also have two other books that I'm still reading. So we'll have to see. This vlog is only going to be about this particular book. And as with my other Cosmere reads within this year, it will be a spoiler-filled vlog. I have spoiler-free content that will be out for this book in my wrap-up. Now, if you've been following this channel for the last few weeks, months, you know that I am rereading a lot of the Cosmere and rereading Mistborn Era 1. I reread it 6 years ago or something. I originally read it 10 years ago, and I am very much excited about this reread. But I have a horrible memory, so I remember book 1. The Final Empire, I remembered pretty well what happened in there, but with The Well of Ascension, I just know what ends up happening at the end of this book. And I think I know at least that my favorite character is popping, or one of my favorite characters is popping up in this one. But I actually don't really know what this book is about at all. So what am I looking forward to? Finding out about OreSeur, because the Final Empire actually made me feel confused, because it mentioned TenSoon, and so I was like, that name rings a bell. That name is important. That name has a role to play, but I don't remember TenSoon, and I'm pretty sure that the character that I like is OreSeur, but now I'm unsure. So we'll have to see. It's something to discover together as I'm diving back into this read. Apart from that, all I really know is that this is probably going to go into their search for Atium, I guess, because at the end of the Final Empire, the Atium was lost, and difficulties of government, I guess, and maybe difficulties of, the role of government, or of Vin and Ellen's relationship. They kind of diverge more. I don't really know anymore, so we'll have to see what ends up happening in this one, but I am eager to dive into it. I don't necessarily foresee a big problem with finishing this one in time. I still have a full weekend in there, and I usually read Brandon Sanderson quite quickly, but I also have sort of procrastination pattern that happens towards the end of the month that I'm going to be trying to avoid here. Like 3 pages in or something, we meet OreSeur. And yes, OreSeur is definitely the character that I remember. It's definitely the character that I like, the one that I was excited about meeting up with again within the Well of Ascension. So who the hell is TenSoon? There's a lot of things already introduced within these first 3 chapters, and I'm like, oh, really? Like, I knew that there was some sort of a conflict. I think the conflict that I have in my head is maybe from the 3rd book in this series, and I'm not going to go into that because this is a spoiler-filled one for Well of Ascension, but not for the Hero of Ages. So I did not know anymore that, like, Ellen's father was, stirring up trouble, though I did at the end of the Final Empire wonder what's happened with Straff Venture after that, because I was like, clearly he's still around, so he can still pop up, but I didn't really remember, and so now I know. I did not remember anything about this Watcher? The Watcher? Who is the Watcher? Why don't I remember this? I mean, I seriously have to rethink my favorite series of all times if I kind of consider Mistborn Era 1 to be my favorite series of all time, but I don't remember a lot of it clearly, so hopefully it'll hold up after I finish it. And then when it comes to the epigraphs or epitaphs, I still don't really know what the exact term is for this thing. I don't know who this is told from. Because at first I was like, I don't remember who it's told from, but it says so in like the epigraph, epitaph, whatever. For chapter 4, it says, "My name is Kwan." I'm gonna assume that he's a fairy chemist, but if this person is of any sort of significance, I have completely forgotten. So I think the conclusion after 3 chapters of The Well of Ascension is already that I do not remember The Well of Ascension at all. Hey guys, it's the weekend, and I have not been putting the weekend reading time to good use. So it's Sunday morning. I am some 190 pages or so into The Well of Ascension, with like 6 days to go until the end of the month. We'll see. I'm still determined to do it, but I was kind of hoping that the last day of the month I could already start my May TBR, and that's really looking like less likely by the minute. But so, things I want to talk about with what I've read so far. So, really, I don't have any sort of memory of this book clearly, because, like, the only thing that I remembered about this book is Orsur and Vin, and I do definitely love that. I'm really looking forward to when that bond gets a little bit closer, because we're still in the enemies, part of the enemies to lovers or to friends in this case. And I guess I just really love that I recognize that in myself. I see that in a lot of books that I read, that I really love sort of like characters who don't like one another, who kind of despise one another, have a very bad relationship with one another, and then through circumstances they are put together, they have to spend time together, and then they learn to like one another and they grow this sort of like deep friendship. That I absolutely love, that trope. And so that is what is the Vin Orsu relationship basically. So I'm very much looking forward to that, going in the different direction, growing into respect, growing into camaraderie, into loyalty. When it comes to the Watcher, as I said, no idea who this guy is. I have no memory of this person being in there. I do like what I did. Like, one of the few things that when I read it, I was like, ah, yeah, okay, and I remembered what the deal was with this character before we actually got to know what the deal is this sort of like political terrorist woman who is going to train Ellens to become a sort of like more charismatic leader. But that is really one of the few things that has made me go like, oh yeah, I do actually know of this element of the book. It's just that I'd forgotten about it. But a lot of the other things I didn't remember. I didn't know that Sazed was on his own for a part of this book, for example. So he is kind of roaming the countryside, doing his job as a keeper by educating the people. But I had forgotten a lot about that part of the storyline. But in my memory, he was always with the rest of them. And so it's been interesting seeing him separately. Also because we've been getting a lot more depth into the fairy chemist's powers. And so, which is also something that I forgot a lot about. And I will say that I think that that is very interesting. And the way in which Brandon Sanderson expands magic system throughout his series, I always think is very interesting. He's always showing how people are having these powers, but how the use of these powers is constantly evolving through the innovation of the human mind, for example. So when it comes to Sazed, it isn't necessarily the case that Sazed is using his powers in an innovative way. That will be more the case with Finn, for example, and I'll dive into that next. But when we are first introduced to fairy chemists and their power, we are introduced to the fact that they can tap into the copper mines and use a certain ability that is stored within it, mainly knowledge, for example, but also, for example, physical power. But that in order for them to be able to store physical power, they have to, for example, be super weak for a long time and store that excess energy into the copper mines. And when you first read that, you think like, okay, that's quite a big downside to having this ability, is that you need to spend the time being super slow, for example, so that afterwards you can use super speed, and you have to be like nearly blind in order for you to afterwards be able to use extra sight through the copper mines. But in this one, we've already seen cases in which it has actually been beneficial for him to store certain things. For example, sense of smell. When he's been in this area where there were decomposing bodies, and so at that point in time, he will actually start storing smell into a copper mine because he doesn't want to smell at that moment in time. And so it's very interesting to see that sort of dynamic and to see that extra layering to the power where, having to store certain sense that we use on a day-to-day basis for later uses isn't always a sacrifice. It can also be something very useful. And so I love that whole dynamic that we get there with the copper mines. Also with the idea that memories, when you store them, they are perfectly preserved within the copper mine. But when you then tap into those memories, because they are then in your own imperfect minds, then they start to get corrupted. So the more you tap into those memories, the more those memories get corrupted, and then you kind of need to refamiliarize yourself with the memory in order to store it again. Brandon Sanderson is very good at showing how the downsides to certain powers, how these characters, yes, they have a lot more abilities than your regular human bodies within this world, but they also have their own checks and balances in place. And so it is not like they can do whatever and nobody will be able to stop them. So I always like that dynamic with Brandon Sanderson's magic systems. But so with Vin, for example, with her elemency, we are also diving into some new uses now because we have found the alloy for aluminum, and so it is creating some interesting new dynamics and some interesting new fighting techniques. And so yeah, I'm really enjoying seeing that in this one. And then, do I have anything else to say? The Kandra. Okay, so there is a second Kandra now, and he is impersonating somebody within their retinue, which I've totally forgotten about. But that, I'm assuming that is then TenSoon. That then explains why the name TenSoon rings a bell. Nothing else about it rings a bell, but the name does. So I'm going to assume TenSoon is the Kandra. I vaguely think it is a Terrace woman, but if it is a Terrace woman, I'm assuming she cannot really use ferrochemistry, but do we ever see her use ferrochemistry? I think the Terrace woman makes most sense in the sense that she is new to the retinue, and she's somebody who they're kind of overlooking. They're thinking mainly about the sort of people who are in their close inner circle already, rather than the person who's just entered into their closer circle. So I'm thinking that. Otherwise, she's Ellen's mother. I don't know. These two ideas are in my mind, and I don't know where they're coming from, whether this is actually part of my memory or whether this is just me messing up other stories with this one, for example. So it could be totally different, of course. This is just kind of what my memory is pushing towards me, what my subconscious is pushing forward. Like, wasn't she Ellen's mother, or isn't she the Kandra? So no idea, guys. I have 000 memory. Alright, just spent the last hour or so outside in the park enjoying some reading time. But then there were a little bit too many skateboarders and couldn't focus anymore. So I decided that, okay, I had enough of vitamin D for today and I'm going to be reading a little bit more inside. But yeah, I have a new theory about who the Kandra is, the imposter Kandra. It is not necessarily a memory, but it suits Brandon Sanderson's brain, I think. It is super clever, I think, and it suits some of the things that I remember about this book. Because what do I remember about this book? Orasur and Vin, the ending. And the fact that the name TenSoon rang a bell. So I think TenSoon is actually that so I think that Tensoon has actually eaten Orosur, so Orosur is actually Tensoon, which would make a whole lot of sense, because what better way to hide a Kandra than to hide a Kandra inside another Kandra? So that's my speculation here. In which case, I love Tensoon, not Orosur. But so yeah, that is actually I'm pretty sure that that is the way that things are working out. I also think that everything that I like was saying earlier about Twindle, the terrorist woman, is all wrong. She will not be Ellen's mother. She is not the Kandra. Um, Apparently, the Watcher is Ellen's brother. I like that clicked like 2 seconds before the reveal came, so I don't think that I can consider that a memory unlocked. Now I kind of know how this is gonna roll out, but not entirely. But I don't necessarily like that element of Zane too much. We'll have to see what happens with that. But it's kind of typical, in my opinion, at this point. But yeah, of course, this book is published already like 15 years ago or something, so it probably wasn't as typical at that point in time. Good morning, guys. I haven't updated you guys in a whole lot, so it's time for me to give some more ideas on my thoughts for The Well of Ascension. So I am 200 pages away from the end now, and we have just had confirmation that Tensoon is indeed the Kandra who has been impersonating Orosur. So that was a correct memory. I have had a few cases in the meantime where I've been like, all right, this is how things go down, and then I'm convinced that that's a memory that I've unlocked, but then it doesn't turn out to be that way. So it's interesting rereading something and trying to figure out like what happens in the first place. But so yeah, I'm very happy with that storyline, and I just love Tensoon, and so I hope. I mean, I know kinda what the storyline is with Tensoon within the Hero of Ages. So it's clear that that is actually basically kinda my favorite character, which sounds weird because I didn't remember a whole lot about him, but I definitely do love the character of Tensoon a whole lot. But so, a whole lot to talk about at this point in time. First up, I really love Vin within the Final Empire and within the Well of Ascension, and it's been kind of made clear to me again what I really love about Vin, because when I kind of tried to remember Vin, I was like, yeah, she is in principle kind of like a lot of YA heroines, but she is different. Now that I've reread it, I am convinced that there is a good reason why I kind of love Vin a whole lot, and that's because she isn't the typical not like other girls heroine, because despite being the badass female character who learns how to fight and who takes on the sort of responsibility that we would traditionally see Guy take up, she becomes a protector of Ellen. She is a knife against people's throats. She also is a girl. She also wants to explore that side to herself, and so she really loved in the first one exploring ballrooms, wearing fancy dresses, getting to dance, getting to be graceful, and things like that. And so I really like that we see that element of sort of like hesitation with that pop back into the second one, because she kind of feels like she's, now that she's out as a Mistborn, she's being pushed even further into that role, and she's not really allowing herself to explore that other side to herself. And so I really love Vin being a female protagonist who isn't just unlike other girls in the sense that she takes on masculine roles, but who also really embraces some of those more feminine sides of her personality. But so we just had the fight between Zane and Vin, so that whole thing just went down, and so I really love the way in which that was solved, because it had been hinted at earlier on. She had been thinking about how to fight somebody, fight a Mistborn who's using Atium, and so that's kind of already indicated like, okay, she is going to want to put him in a situation where there are two possibilities or multiple possibilities, and no matter which move he makes, he will always end up dying. but I wasn't really sure how that went down. And I really like that whole idea of, reacting to somebody, to reacting to your future decision without you actually having made the future decision yet. So I really thought that was another nice, clever way of twisting the power system, or of twisting the magical system, because I love how Brandon Sanderson works with his magic system, how he explores the extents to the magic system or innovation within the magic system. And in this one, he basically explores the flaws of the magic system. So I always think that he has a very nuanced usage of the magic system, because it isn't just, he really thinks through magic systems completely, to all the possibilities, all the implications. And so I love that when it comes to this book. But so yeah, not a whole lot that I have to talk about anymore, because I don't actually really remember everything that has happened since the last time I updated you guys. But one final thing, I guess, is the god figure. So I really didn't remember this when Zane hears these voices inside of his head. I didn't, in fact, just think that it did remind me of Nightbloods, the blades in Warbreaker. And so I don't know whether there's a link between that or not, but it did remind me of that, because Nightblood is also constantly asking to kill people and things like that. So when you have this god voice that's constantly telling Zane, kill him, kill him, kill him, then it was just automatically going to remind me of that. But as Zane lay dying, God speaks to him and gives him a whole explanation, not a whole explanation, but gives him a much bigger speech than the sort of easy kill him thing that he always did. And he tells him that of course he wasn't gonna ask him to kill Vin, meaning that he's manipulating things. So guys, I finished The Well of Ascension. I also clarified the whole reading history with Mistborn, because it was a bit unclear to me when I had read Mistborn, because I knew I'd read it twice, but there's only one registered in Goodreads, because Goodreads didn't allow you to track rereads for a very long time. But now I finally figured it out, because I was just posting my sort of update to my review of The Well of Ascension, and the first line in that original review was, "I will not wait as long as I did between Final Empire and Well of Ascension, the way that I did I will not wait that long for the Hero of Ages." Meaning that what I originally thought was that I had read the entire Mistborn trilogy twice, but now I'm pretty sure that I read the Final Empire, waited 3 years, and then reread Final Empire and continued on. So the rest, that totally clarifies why I have great memories of the Final Empire, or pretty good memory of the Final Empire, but very bad memory of the Well of Ascension and Hero of Ages, because basically I read the Final Empire twice and the other ones only once. So first up, let's talk about Elend becoming a Mistborn. I think at the time when I first read it, I was absolutely down for it. I really loved it. At this point in time, I would have loved to see him stay a normal character. Would have loved to see him stay a central character, a character in a position of power, doing great things by being a great leader, without him becoming a Mistborn himself. I would have loved to explore this relationship between Vin and Elend more, keeping them separate from another, keeping them different from one another. A lot of the storyline in The Well of Ascension is Zane trying to create conflict between Elend and Vin by convincing Vin that Elend is too different from her, and that they are too different and that it can never work for them. And yes, you've kind of resolved that by getting them to be married, but a marriage in principle can also just be a name. So I would have loved for them to really cement that relationship across their differences within Hero of Ages, rather than bridging those differences by making him Mistborn. I will say that the whole Hero of Ages prophecy thing, I just think is even more impressive rereading it, because I definitely knew that part. I did remember that, and I still know some things about that. going into Hero of Ages that haven't popped up yet, but I definitely think that that is masterfully crafted. The way in which this entire series kind of keeps misdirecting us about that prophecy and about the way in which that prophecy came about, has been manipulated, can be interpreted. So I think that that is just brilliant, and that's just a typical case of Brandon Sanderson and his plots brilliance. And so I just think it is amazing to see that go down. I wasn't entirely sure whether we kind of know already that the prophecy is kind of false or tainted or whatever at the end of the Well of Ascension, but we do have that information now, and so that's why I can finally talk about it. But I thought it was really well done. All the foreshadowing for that is there throughout this book is very impressive upon rereads. I know that for a lot of people, Well of Ascension is considered to be the weakest of the Mistborn trilogy, and I think I can understand that, but that's not my point of view, or at least we'll have to see until I read The Hero of Ages. But my review for The Hero of Ages actually is very short, so I don't have a lot of insight on my thoughts at that point in time. But my review for Well of Ascension basically is talking about how quickly I read that, how I was like marathoning through that book, and how I wanted there to be more hours in a day so that I could still finish it, and how devastated I was that I had to go to sleep like 3 hours before finishing it. And my review for The Hero of Ages basically mentioned that I liked it a lot, but that I hadn't felt as compelled through it the way I had with The Well of Ascension. So we'll have to see what ends up happening there. But I think the difficulty a lot of people have with Well of Ascension is that we basically move from Final Empire, in which we are having a heist-centered storyline. We are following a group of outcasts, a group that is kind of like, they're kind of the anti-heroes, and they are banding together as an outcast group against the odds of a situation, trusting in one another against the odds of that type of situation, and fighting against the establishment. Whereas in Well of Ascension, we are completely shifting the tone in that aspect, because we are looking at this group who has overcome all of that, now being in a leadership role, now having to be that authority figure. And so it's a lot more of a political fantasy within the second one, which is one of the main problems a lot of people have with it, is all of the politics that go down in it. I personally love political fantasy, so for me that really wasn't a problem at all. And I really love that sort of idea as well. This is also what Brandon Sanderson indicates in his foreword. The story he wanted to tell isn't really Final Empire, for example. He wanted to tell the story of this rebel group who have won a rebellion, but what comes next? What comes after you've won the rebellion and you have to establish a society, and you have to establish a new sort of government, a new sort of stable political landscape for the world that you've just shook up. And so I think Final Empire is still my favorite so far out of these two. Just because it is such a nice, well-contained story. But I absolutely love Well of Ascension as well, because it is a super slow build, but I like slow builds. And it just completely upsets the sort of like fundamentals that you've learned about in the first book, which I always love. I always love it when a second book can overthrow what you thought was happening in the first one. But so yeah, on that note, I'm going to be ending this reading vlog here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely let me know your thoughts on the Well of Ascension. Do not spoil the Hero of Ages in the comments, please, because this reading vlog is intended to spoil the Final Empire and Well of Ascension. But for people who haven't read the Hero of Ages yet, I like for it to still remain an accessible video for them. So yeah, moving on to the Hero of Ages next month. Really looking forward to it, and to figuring out how much of what I remember of that book is accurate. Because just like with the Well of Ascension, I just have a few elements in my head, a few big ones, a few major ones, but still, I only have a few ones. And since people are saying that the Hero of Ages absolutely crushed them, I'm just like, did one of these main characters die without me remembering? Because that would be so bad. So yeah, let's find out next month. Hope you guys enjoyed this reading vlog, and see you guys for a future video. Bye!